Hi there, welcome to another Gaming Memories video. In this one I'm going to be focusing on a genre that's been entertaining us for over 40 years, constantly innovating and evolving. It's the platform game. And like most action genres, the platform game began life in the arcades with 1980's Space Panic, considered to be the first platforms and ladders game and by association also the first clear all the enemies platformer. Nintendo's Donkey Kong arrived a year later and brought about some of the staple gameplay mechanics in platform games, including the ability to jump and pick up weapons. This was also the first appearance of elevators and the originator of the reach the exit style of platformer. Of course, it also saw the debut of a character that would become synonymous with platform games over the years. Platform games became big business on the 8-bit home systems of the early 80s, with games like Manic Miner and Chuck Egg being hugely successful and popularising the collect all the items gameplay mechanic. Around the same time, another collect-em-up platformer arrived on the Atari 2600 in the form of Activision's Pitfall, which added an openly explorable flick-screen environment to the genre and can be seen as one of the first platform adventure games. From the mid-80s to the early 90s, the scrolling platformer brought about the golden age of 2D platform games, with Super Mario Bros. And Sonic the Hedgehog setting the standard. With non-linear progression, power-ups, secret areas and boss battles, the platformer continued to evolve and go from strength to strength. The mid-90s and beyond saw the rise of 3D capable consoles, and with them came the platform games move into 3 dimensions. Huge open worlds and quirky gameplay mechanics took the genre a long way from its origins, and though other genres such as first-person shooters became more popular, some of the most innovative games and enduring characters sprung from this era. In recent years though, we've seen the return of the 2D platformer in the hands of smaller independent studios, with the gameplay mechanics set down by Mario and Sonic giving unique new twists and some breathtaking art style in games like Braid, Limbo and Typo Man. So that was a very brief history of the platforming genre over the last 40 years, featuring some of the most well-known games. But that's not what this video is about, because what I'm going to be looking at is 10 platform games you've probably never played, but probably should. Now, they may not be the best games, in fact if they were you probably would have heard of them, but they've all got some kind of interesting factor to them that I think makes them worth having a look at. So we're going to look at 10 games across 10 different systems from 1984 to 2001, and let's see what you think of them. If you've played any of these games then let me know in the comments, and if you haven't then let me know in the comments which ones you would like to play. So here we go, let's take a look at 10 platform games you've probably never played, but probably should.
Let's begin this list on the trusty BBC Micro with Felix Meets the Evil Weevils, released by Micropower in 1984. This is the third game in Micropower's Felix series, following platformer Felix in the Factory and Pac-Man clone Felix and the Fruit Monsters. In this game, killer weevils have overrun a factory and Felix must destroy them by spraying them with pesticide. You need one can of pesticide to kill each weevil, and you must be quick because if a weevil reaches the mutation chamber it becomes a much faster and deadlier purple super weevil. Once all weevils on a stage are eliminated, you move on to a new level with a different layout of conveyor belts and tubes and more enemies. Felix must also be wary of ball bearings which come rolling along the conveyors which kill him instantly. In addition to the essential aerosol sprays, other useful items will appear from time to time. The belt lever enables you to reverse the direction of the conveyors at will, oxygen cylinders replenish your ever-dwindling air supply, and the emergency panic button makes you immune to weevils and ball bearings for a short time, but can only be used once per life. This is definitely the best of the 3 Felix games and could be seen as an evolution of Space Panic, with the same aim of eliminating all enemies to complete a level and the player's inability to jump. The platforms and ladders are replaced with conveyors and tubes which bring their own problems as you're constantly being moved around and might miss a weevil coming down a tube that you're heading up. The addition of power-ups adds some strategy, and although the sprites are small they allow for fast gameplay and the animation of the weevils is well done. The game has the vibe of a classic coin-op with frantic gameplay and a pretty steep difficulty curve, and the sound effects play their part in bringing about panic as the weevils chase you down. While it may not be the greatest platform game the Beeb has to offer, it's conceptually pretty neat and certainly very playable. We're now going to move on to look at 3 games from 1985, the first of which is Cohen Co, released for the Commodore 64 by Radarsoft. The elaborate backstory for this game tells us that in 1639 King Arthur's magical sword Excalibur was found and broken into 2 pieces by the evil Graf von Sforzhausen, then hidden in a labyrinth on an island in the Aegean Sea. Inside the labyrinth can also be found the 12 signs of the zodiac, and these have interacted with the broken sword to create an enormous colony of vampire bats which threaten the population. Two heroes must enter the labyrinth and work together to locate the 12 zodiac signs and place them on the Wheel of Fortune, which will reveal the hidden parts of Excalibur and allow the horde of bats to be vanquished. The labyrinth consists of 256 screens interconnected by doors and teleporters. The nameless heroes can be controlled by 1 or 2 players and must work through the screens to locate the 12 zodiac signs. Each screen requires puzzles to be solved, often requiring one character to activate switches to allow the other to progress. Some levels require the player to build ladders or grab rails in order to reach inaccessible areas, and there are also one-way conveyor belts and elevators to contend with. Movement to a new screen can only occur when both players reach the same exit. The vampire bats patrol the labyrinth and contact with them will send the player back to their starting point. Lives are infinite, but each screen has a time limit and there's also an overall time limit for the quest. I only discovered this game while researching for this video, and it wasn't going to be my original C64 choice, but once I gave it a try there was no doubt it had to be included as a really interesting and well made hidden gem. Graphically it may not look like much, though the animation on the player characters is great, but gameplay wise it's brilliant. The cooperative nature of the game combined with some excellent action based puzzles to solve and near unlimited playtime makes for one of the most unique games in the Commodore 64 library, and I found myself completely hooked on solving one screen after another. It's obviously designed to be a 2-player game, but it can be played by one player using F7 to switch control between the two heroes. That does make things extra tricky in some places, but all screens can be completed with perseverance and good planning. The bats tend to follow the active character so you can control their movement to some extent and draw them away from the other one. The levels where you have to build bridges or ladders bring to mind a game that was released many years after this one, Lemmings, so much so that you have to wonder if the developers of that game were partly inspired by this one. I've only begun to scratch the surface of this game, having only located a couple of the zodiac symbols, and with 256 screens it feels so big that it could take hours to complete. It does get somewhat laborious to complete some levels, but this is without doubt a game I intend to explore further, and I'd love to play it with a second player to really get the experience that Radarsoft had in mind when they designed it. Next up from 1985 we have King's Valley, released for the MSX by Konami. It's also since received homebrew conversions for the Commodore 64 and Spectrum. I've already featured this game in my MSX Exclusives video a few months ago where it came out at number 1, but that won't stop me championing it again as I'm making it my mission to ensure as many people as possible know about this brilliant game. You take control of an explorer searching 15 tombs within a pyramid for jewels while trying to evade an endless army of mummies. The enemies follow colour-coded behavioural patterns, with white mummies wandering aimlessly while blue ones are more targeted and red ones chase after you, running up and down stairs faster than you can. The player can jump over mummies, or throwing knives can be picked up and thrown at them, but they do respawn shortly after being killed. While some jewels can be easily collected, others are hidden behind one-way doors or in areas that require pickaxes to reach them. Each axe can only be used once, so care must be taken to use them in the correct spots to access the gems. After finding all the jewels, the door to the next level opens up, or sometimes 2 doors, one of which leads back to the previous stage. The sprites are simplistic but cute, the Egyptian theme music is catchy and the sound effects are good too, but what makes this game stand out is the gameplay. Each level brings about new challenges, be it more dangerous enemies or more complicated puzzles, whilst also adding new items or hazards as you progress, so completing each stage gives a great sense of achievement. Originally an MSX exclusive and quite hard to find, homebrew conversions for the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 as shown here have been released in the last decade or so, meaning there's now no excuse to miss an often overlooked gem of the 8-bit era. And the third game from 1985 is the Fairyland story, an arcade game released by Taito. In this cute single screen platformer the player controls the witch Ptolemy, with the objective being to clear the screen of all enemies. Ptolemy uses her wand to turn the enemies into cakes, which she can then either destroy or push off platforms onto other enemies to squash them. Power-up items often appear throughout the stages that increase Ptolemy's projectile range or allow her to kill multiple enemies at the same time. The enemies are based on typical fantasy beings including orcs, dragon-like creatures that can breathe fire, and wizards that can make Ptolemy shrink and disappear. On later stages a large worm can appear from holes in the background and either grab the player or her enemies. If more than one enemy is killed at once, a coin will appear that can be collected for additional points. As more coins are collected, their points value multiplies so long as the player doesn't lose a life. If Ptolemy takes too long to kill the last remaining enemy on a stage, eventually that enemy will disappear without an award of points. At various intervals between levels, an intermission screen appears showing Ptolemy riding on a large blue dragon. A message appears on each of these intermission screens either congratulating the player or warning of some hazard in the next level. You don't have to be a genius to work out that this game is Taito's precursor to the 1986 hit Bubble Bobble. Many of the elements found in that legendary game can be seen in the Fairyland story, from the single screen platform layout to the aim of destroying all the cute enemies and collecting bonuses and power-ups once you've done so. It's certainly nowhere near as refined as Bubble Bobble, with slightly twitchy controls, some strange level layouts and the lack of a cooperative two-player mode, but it still has plenty of positive points. The graphics are colourful and attractive, and the music and sound effects fit the theme of the game nicely. There are also some neat gameplay elements, such as when Ptolemy gets zapped and shrunk by a wizard and remains stuck under her hat until the level's completed or you lose a life. The worm that shows up in later stages is interesting too, as it can be used to capture enemies, and the game is packed with bonus items and power-ups that allow you to rack up big scores, just as you're able to do in Taito's later game. The Fairyland story is quite rightly not regarded as an arcade classic, but it's still a fun game and is well worth a look if you're interested in exploring the origins of Bubble Bobble. We're now going to move on to console games, and first up we have Bio Miracle Bokutte Upa, released by Konami in 1988 on the Famicom Disk System, though my footage is captured from the NES Mini. Upa is the prince of a magical kingdom and the most recently born of a line of brave fighters. One day the evil demon Zai takes the life force of the kingdom's adults and kidnaps all the babies apart from Upa, who is given a magical rattle by a fairy, and so Upa crawls into action in order to save his kingdom. The game takes place across a series of worlds which Upa must navigate by crawling and jumping. Upa uses the rattle to attack his enemies, and when hit they will inflate and float away. The enemies can then be used as temporary platforms to climb to higher places, or they can also be used as weapons if pushed in any direction. The enemy will ricochet off objects and cause damage to both the player and other enemies if it comes into contact with them. The game uses a health meter that can be replenished by obtaining bottles of milk scattered throughout the levels. A heart icon can also be obtained, increasing the maximum health by 1 unit for the duration of the current world. Dying at any point on a level sees you return right to the start, and at the end of most stages there's a boss character that must be eliminated. As well as typical platforming stages, there are also levels that take place underwater and even inside a huge cake. Konami's game is certainly unique with its infant protagonist, but it still has that iconic NES platformer look and feel. The first thing you'll have to get to grips with when playing it is that you can't do the common thing of jumping on enemies to kill them, instead having to hit them with the magic rattle. That does take a bit of getting used to, but once you do you'll find a lot of versatility in the game, as you can use the enemies as temporary platforms or whack them again to hit them towards other foes. The latter becomes essential when you come up against the end of level bosses. Given it was originally released in Japan the same year as Super Mario Bros. 3, it's not as impressive in terms of graphical design and it's a far more linear experience, but the level design is pretty good and there is some variety with the addition of underwater stages, for example. The backgrounds tend to be quite generic, but the main sprite is cute and well animated, and there's a good range of enemies to contend with. Like most Konami games, it's pretty tough and there are some really frustrating moments, but the difficulty is mitigated to some extent by regular power-ups and health bonuses. In the end, very few games let you play as a kick-ass baby, so it's worth a look for that alone. If you're interested in trying it out, it's worth noting that the game began life on the Famicom Disk System, but in 1993 it was released as a cartridge for the Famicom as well. It remained a Japanese exclusive until its release on Nintendo's Wii Virtual Console in 2008, before later being released on the 3DS and Wii U Virtual Consoles. Next up we have Legend of Hero Tonma, released for the NEC PC Engine by IREM Corporation in 1991, based on their arcade game from 1989, but the PC Engine version is generally considered to be more forgiving. A cape magician called Tonma must travel through 7 stages in the demon world to rescue a kidnapped princess. The journey will see him battle through ruins, cliffs, woodland, dungeons and finally the demon's castle. Stages scroll either horizontally or vertically from one level to the next and are fairly linear, but occasionally you may need to pick up a key in order to unlock a door blocking your progress. Trying to stop Tonma on his mission are a variety of enemies which he has to destroy by launching fireballs at them. He may also jump on their heads to stun them for a moment. Power-ups will increase the range and power of his fireballs as well as granting shields, while treasure chests can be opened allowing him to collect coins. At the end of each stage there is a boss that must be defeated in order to proceed. The hero can be killed by a single hit but will respawn at an earlier checkpoint after dying. With its fast pace and relentless flood of enemies, Legend of Hero Tonma has the feel of a run and gun game, but it has its fair share of platforming elements too. Movement back and forth through each level is fairly free and enemies respawn and enter the screen from both directions, and so you constantly have to deal with them while hammering the fire button. After a fairly straightforward first level, the difficulty ramps up and with one hit kills there can be some enraging moments, but if you pick up all the power-ups you can make good progress, especially if you make use of an auto-fire joypad. The sprites are large, bright and well drawn, the scrolling is smooth and there's some huge bosses to deal with at the end of each stage. The game could be seen as a fantasy take on Capcom's Ghosts and Goblins, with the introductory map screen and creatures rising from the ground being notable similarities. It's a little more accessible than that game, though not as iconic, and while it's by no means the best platformer on the PC Engine, it has enough about it to be worth a play. Next we move on to the Sega Mega Drive and Waniwani World, released by Kaneko in 1992. In this game, one or two players take on the roles of small dinosaurs that must eliminate all the enemies on each single screen level and collect food and power-ups when they've been destroyed. That may sound suspiciously like Bubble Bobble, but actually Waniwani World is a modified conversion of the 1991 Kaneko coin-op The Berlin Wall and has more in common with the first ever platform game Space Panic. The two dinos, Charlie and Smiley, are armed with large hammers and their only method of attack is to bash a hole in the ground, wait for an enemy to fall into it, and then hit them on the head, causing the enemy to fall and transform into power-up items and food. The characters can't jump, so must negotiate the levels via platforms and ladders, with some stages also featuring teleporters and trampolines. There are 5 worlds to traverse, each with a vertically scrolling final stage that features a large boss at the end. There's also a minigame between worlds where bonus items can be earned. The graphical similarities to Bubble Bobble are more than evident in this game, although the two protagonists seem to have a lot more attitude than Bub and Bob. Gameplay wise though, it's not really that similar, as the action is a little more strategic as you have to negotiate each stage, avoiding the enemies and getting into the right position to create the holes for them to fall into. There are loads of great power-ups, from the expected speed and weapon enhancements to secondary weapons such as bombs, and even one that triggers a fruit machine to award loads of bonus food items. The stage layouts are well designed, although the backgrounds and platform graphics are quite boring, and the scrolling levels that precede each world's boss battle add a little variety to proceedings. Overall, it's an enjoyable co-op arcade game that doesn't do anything too original, but is an interesting mashup of two influential coin-ops and one of only a few clear the enemies style platform games on the Mega Drive. Our next platformer is Hamelin no Violin Hiki, also known as Violinist of Hamelin. This is a Super Famicom game released by Enix in 1995, although what you can see here is a translated version which I'm playing on the SNES Mini. This scrolling platformer with puzzle elements sees you take on the role of Hamel, an adventurer who plays music on his violin to dispatch his enemies. Hamel arrives in Staccato, a small town under attack from monsters, and drives them away with his musical power. Impressed, a girl named Flute agrees to go with Hamel in order to find and destroy the evil power behind the attacks. The game is in essence a typical platform where you must negotiate each stage and reach the exit. However, you must count on Flute's aid to negotiate certain hazards. Flute follows you and must be guided to the exit to complete a stage, although you can order her to stay put. She can be grabbed and thrown at enemies or used as a platform to access out of reach areas. You can also collect costumes for her that give her special abilities such as avoiding spikes, higher jumping and breaking walls. She cannot die but does have a health level, and if you complete an area without her being damaged then you get to access a bonus stage. After completing an area you can also return to the village to buy items with any gold coins you've picked up during the game. 5 years into the life of the SNES, there are loads of great platform games coming out with fantastic graphics and unique game mechanics, but Violinist of Hamelin still manages to stand out on both fronts. The sprites have a cute cartoony look to them that belies their manga origins, with some lovely animation and humour in their reactions to certain situations. Some of the background graphics are simply beautiful and the soundtrack is excellent too, mostly consisting of adaptations of well-known classical tunes. Of course, what really matters is gameplay, and again this is a real standout with a mixture of action and simple puzzle solving. Using flute as a weapon or a way to access certain areas is an ingenious touch, and then when you start to get the different suits for it adds even more originality to the game. It's amusing because in some ways Hamel is the less important of the two characters, and that is noted in some of the cutscenes throughout the game. Having said that, he does prove his worth in certain situations, as he must use musical notes to activate moving platforms and the like. It's not a particularly hard game, certainly to begin with, and extra lives can be found on most stages, so it's a relatively relaxed experience that's more about exploration and solving puzzles than defeating difficult enemies or negotiating tough platform sections. With a large game world to discover and an ever more bizarre set of costumes to equip your sidekick with, Violinist of Hamelin is one of the most interesting Super Famicom exclusives and is sure to entertain any fan of 16-bit platformers. For the last two games in this list we move into the 21st century, and firstly we have Curry Curry Mix, also known as The Adventures of Cookie and Cream. This PlayStation 2 game was released by Empire Interactive in 2001. Chestnut, known as Cookie in some versions, and Cream are two rabbits who are on their way home on the eve of their clan's moon festival when they meet a messenger who tells them that the moon is gone and if no one finds it there will never be another festival. The characters find themselves transported to a mysterious island where they go on a mission to get the moon back. On each stage, one or two players must guide Chestnut and Cream to the goal before the time runs out. The game is designed to be played cooperatively by two players, but also supports a single player mode where you control both characters at the same time with one controller. Throughout the game, the characters must work together to navigate through the stage, negotiating obstacles and avoiding hazards. Most obstacles require one character to perform a specific action so that the other is able to advance. Stages are themed to a variety of environments including jungle, desert and music, and each area ends with a large boss that must be destroyed using teamwork. Enemies can latch onto the heroes and drain valuable time, but players can pick up watches which add time and collect puzzle pieces to unlock characters to use in the game's multiplayer party mode, which supports up to 4 players. This game was developed by From Software, best known for the Armored Core and Dark Souls series, and it really couldn't be much more different to those games with its cute characters and bright colours. In essence, this is an evolution of Cohen that I mentioned earlier in this video, with two players working together to reach the end of each stage, although the time limit is a lot more strict in this game. As a two-player game it's relatively simple and would be a great game for a parent to play with their child, but if you want a real challenge then try playing it alone, controlling both characters with one pad. The need to constantly keep moving, keeping one eye on each character and make them interact with the environment is completely mind-blowing, but there's great satisfaction to be had in getting both bunnies to the goal. Graphically it's really attractive with some vibrant environments and enemies that are generally just as cute as the main characters. The fixed 3D perspective does take a little while to get used to and will result in some mistimed jumps to begin with, but all the levels are short enough that failing them isn't too frustrating. The sound can be annoying at times though, especially when an enemy grabs hold of you and needs to be shaken off, but the in-game tunes are appropriately jolly. The puzzles start off quite easy to solve, but by the time you get to the music themed stages they've become quite devious, requiring both dexterity and timing, which is especially difficult in the single player mode. The whole concept is very unique though, and quite typically Japanese in respect to the game's aesthetics and design, and with plenty of stages to complete and a multiplayer race mode there's plenty of value to be had from a game that you can easily pick up for less than a tenner. And finally for this video we have Santa Claus Jr. on the Nintendo Game Boy Color, although my footage is taken using the Game Boy converter on the Nintendo GameCube. This game was released by Joe Wood Productions in 2001 and developed by Neon Software. An evil witch has kidnapped Santa Claus and his reindeer, and a fairy enlists the help of a young boy called Nick to rescue Santa in time for Christmas. With the fate of Christmas resting on his young shoulders, Nick has to find all the presents Santa lost when the witch caught him, and then face the witch and free Santa Claus so that Christmas is saved. Taking place across 60 winter-themed levels set in 6 worlds, Nick must collect the presents and other items, vanquish enemies by jumping on them, and also avoid a variety of natural hazards. Levels scroll in all directions and can be freely explored, with many containing secret areas that allow you to collect extra lives. The game employs a password system to allow you to restart further through the game on subsequent playthroughs. Well, this is a real rarity, a Christmas themed game that's actually worth playing any time of year. It seems a little odd that the newest game in this list is a 2D platformer on an 8-bit system, but that does show that while 3D games were all the rage on the home consoles of the era, 2D games were still going strong on the handhelds. It may have been an 8-bit game, but Santa Claus Jr. really reminds me of some of the classic Amiga platformers like James Pond or Zool, in game design, graphics and sound. The levels are generally quite large, and while the aim is always simply to reach the exit, you can choose to do that as quickly as possible or spend time exploring. The graphics and animation are really well done, with lots of interesting backgrounds and a variety of ground-based and flying enemies that fit the theme well. The music is odd at times, being quite dark in places, and the choice of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as the main theme rather than an actual Christmas tune is bizarre. Another curious decision was that there's no scoring in the game, so this is purely about progression and exploration if you choose it. There's not much more to say about this one. It's a fun and well designed platformer that is never too challenging, and with 60 stages and a password system there would have been plenty to keep you interested when you're on the move back in the early 21st century. As Christmas games go, this is about as good as it gets. So there you go, that brings my list of 10 platform games you've probably never played to an end. So was I right? Have you played any of these games? If so, what did you think? And if not, which ones seemed most interesting to you? If you have any opinions on these games or suggestions for other obscure platformers, then please leave a comment. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, then please check out my other content and consider subscribing. Thanks very much for watching, and come back soon.